Hello people in the GoogleNet. I'm Greg, or Clevelan Phord, whichever one Brian wants to call me. I go by either one. I'm working on several projects here in my shop, and I wanted to share a little bit with what's going on with what I'm doing, and like to maybe provide some information that might be helpful to somebody that Brian can use and share out there on his websites and YouTube channel and whatever else it is he does on the Google. I'm not much of a Googler, but I'd like to share some of what I've learned and what I can do to help. I'm going to flip the camera around in just a minute and show you all what I'm working on, and then I'm going to show you what we're really going to work on, which is going to be something very practical. So here we go. Alrighty, I've got a 1962 unibody Ford that I'm working on. I've done a whole bunch of extensive work to it, and I really enjoy it. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be my daily driver eventually. I'm working on an engine for it. It's a 5.0 with some used and scavenged and gathered parts I've got. Some of the parts are a little fancy. I've got forged rods and forged pistons, and it's going to turn 6,500 RPM and ought to put out a little over 300 horsepower. But, however, what we've got going on, I'm going to walk out here. I'm going to show you what I call the frilly frally. This car's been my daily driver for a couple of years now. It is a 1994 Ford Mustang convertible with a 3.8 liter fuel injected Google controlled motor and an AODE transmission. The other day we had a little trouble out of it. And holy crap, there's no motor or transmission. Well, that's the rest of the story. This engine was approaching about 200,000 miles, and the transmission started to slip. So I promptly pulled the whole drivetrain, stripped it down, and took it out properly so that I could perhaps sell it to someone who wants to rebuild it. Now this right here is a 3.8 liter fuel injected V6. It's got a whole bunch of wires on it, and I believe with the transmission, the two of them weighed about 625 pounds, which was a beast to get out for me. Anyway, here's what we're going to do. This is our project. I'm going to use parts that I can afford, that I have in hand, that I can acquire, and that I don't have to pay a lot of fancy machining for. What I've got here is a 1996 5.0 liter engine out of a Ford Explorer. I purchased this at a junkyard for $350. When I got it home and took it apart, I ran the codes, looked through everything, and discovered that I've got the basis for a pretty good motor. And we're going to learn a little bit about that, which ones to pick and why, and how they can be rebuilt easy. The trick to this one is when I got it home and took it apart, I found out it had very, very few miles on it. Evidently the Explorer got wrecked early in its life, and the engine sat in a storage house on a pallet for several years before I purchased it. I believe that this is going to be a humdinger. I'm going to flip the stand over real quick and show you what we're talking about for identification. Okay, on these Ford engines, the 5.0s and the 5.8s, which is a liter designation for the fuel-injected motors. They're a little different than the older 302s and 351 Windsors, which is basically what they're an upgraded version of. Right here on the block, you find a series of numbers. And right up here on a 302 or 5.0, you find a series of numbers right here. When I go through these numbers, it tells me when this engine was designed, when this casting for the casting was made, and up here it tells me when it was cast. This engine come out of the foundry on the 18th of January of 1996. Okay, so some of the things that you can look for to identify the motor that we want to deal with, which is the 5.0, is a one-piece remain seal, and I will show that when I disassemble. Also a timing cover with no fuel pump. There's no mechanical fuel pump on the timing cover because it had an electric fuel pump. what we're going to find when we get inside that this motor was actually the same as a Cobra Mustang motor, or a Mustang motor, GT something they had going on that was supposed to be a little bit better than a stock 5.0 that they would put in Grandma's car. And they put it in the Explorers and used them up. Another thing you want to look for a 5.0 is that it has these threaded holes here. When you take them apart, there's a spider looking thing in here that puts its fingers down and holds the lifters down. We'll see that when we go back together, or perhaps I can show it in the meantime. That's desirable too. The lifters aren't cheap, and you can reuse them if you clean them up. This engine also had what was known as GT40 heads. The GT40 heads have a GT designation here, one here, and 3 lines on the fronts. If they have 4 lines, they're known as a GT40P, and the GT40P has a real funny header system built on it, and the plugs are in at a straight angle. The plugs do not go in at an angle, they go in almost straight, and they are a nightmare to try and get exhaust for. So I would just stick with the GT40s if I was going to search for a good head that I had to do something with myself, and I didn't want to spend a lot of money on, or I didn't want to purchase aluminums. I have all the parts of these heads. I have disassembled them, and I'll show you what I learned when I... Okay, the tools that I'm going to need when I do this project are for measuring. The tools I need are for measuring. I'm going to need to have a set of dial indicator calipers. Okay, that's going to be a need to have. They're not very expensive. You can go to Harbor Freight and buy you a set. I've got a dial indicator here on a stand. It's very useful. Not a must-have to have, but it sure does help, and I'm not in that a bunch of money either. A good torque wrench. Sometimes you might need 2, or you may have to go to your local parts store and do the loaner tool thing and get you a couple. You cannot do this job without a torque wrench. You have got to do that properly. That's something that can't be omitted. You can't just say, well, I think it's tight, and let it go. Also, a honing tool. You might be able to borrow one of these. You might have a friend that has one. It might just be really cool to own one too. I don't know how much you'd have to spend for one. They might set you back just a little bit. But after they bore a motor, they hone it. And what we're going to do is just re-hone the motor. We're going to clean it up, and then we're going to measure it with some special measuring tools I've got, and see if it came out straight, square, true, cylindrical, without taper. So I will catch up with you guys tomorrow morning, and we will get started on disassembling a motor and cleaning it up. Okay, now I'm sitting back on my lazy man stool in the corner of my shop. 2 days ago, I was sitting here and doing my thing and working on a project, and I was thinking about something, and I took that transmission that we talked about off the motor, and I took it on a dolly, and I took it down to my storage building to put it up, save it for another project. Saving parts, you don't have to purchase them twice because you throw them away or pass them off or sold them for a little bit of money real quick. Sometimes it's a good idea. Anyway, I came back to the shop, and I was thinking about my trailer and how I was going to get my little trailer and put the motor on the trailer and set it outside, and what I was going to do. And I heard a noise falling in the shop. I sounded like gravel. And I thought, well, my chain hoist is clicking. Something's wrong with my chain hoist, and the motor's starting to drop itself to the floor. And I looked at it real close. Nope. I come in and was studying it, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw shotgun shells hitting the floor. Well, I've got shotgun up over the door and some shotgun shells right there. So I was standing over here, and there was a snake in the garage, and he'd wrapped himself all up around the shotgun and was trying to get up above into the upper shelves up there above the rafters. That was an eventful moment. Excitement in the shop. I have my hands full, and I don't like snakes. Not even a little bit. Not at all. So anyway, when I'm sitting here on my stool, I'm kind of concerned about the snake crawling along these motors behind me and working his way up the shelf like he must have the other day while I was sitting here looking at the Google. Anyway, we will get back to the other stuff later. I'm going to come out here tomorrow, and I'm going to show you how to disassemble and take this motor apart. I believe that this engine is going to come apart, and I'm not going to have to buy new pistons. I'm going to buy bearings. I'm going to buy gaskets. I'm going to buy seals. I'm going to re-hone the cylinders and put new oversized rings in and fit them by hand. In doing that, I'm going to save a tremendous amount of money.